There's an ancient thought experiment called the Ship of Theseus. Imagine you are a captain of a famous wooden ship. Over time, its boards begin to rot, so you replace them one by one. A new mast, a new deck, a new hull. Eventually, not a single piece of the original ship remains, only its name. And there lies the question, is it really still the same ship? In 2013, any Swede could turn on their TV and watch a fully fledged documentary series on ninjas in pyjamas. And if they got hungry, they could order a McNip from their nearest McDonald's. NIP created Counter-Strike's first global dynasty. Their players became national celebrities, reached 5 consecutive major finals, produced a record that will probably never be broken, and became so ridiculously popular in Sweden that McDonald's gave them their own f***ing burger. They were so good that for a couple of years, their name became synonymous with the game they played. 14 years later, if you looked at Counter-Strike's biggest tournament of the year, you wouldn't even find them. But the tragedy isn't simply that NIP became bad. The tragedy is that although the organisation still exists, you will struggle to find anything even remotely connected to their legacy. A tier 2 roster, no Swedish identity, barely any fans. Even the logo is different. They changed and replaced everything. And I do mean everything, except their name. It almost feels like they were intentionally trying to erase their past. Rather than one clear, fatal cause, they suffered a death by 1,000 cuts. Every short-term fix, every mischance, every decision that pulled them a little further from the identity that once made them legendary. And the more they tried to patch the cracks, the more obvious it became that something much deeper was breaking. So this is not only the story of how the greatest team from Counter-Strike's early years fell out of contention, it is the story of how ninjas in pyjamas dismantled the very identity that made them iconic, one piece at a time. By the way, a full team of people worked on this video. If you'd like to help us make more content like this, check out today's sponsor, Skins Monkey. If you are getting tired of your skins, Skins Monkey is here to save the day with their trusted, fully automated platform. Just look how easy it is to trade your old skins for fresh ones. You'll have a brand new look in minutes. When you use code DWEG, you will get up to $5 in free credit as a welcome bonus on your first trade. The more you trade, the larger the bonus. If you are looking to just purchase skins rather than trade them, you are free to do that too. With code DWEG, Skins Monkey gives you a 35% deposit bonus. You can even get skins completely for free by completing fun tasks or by entering daily, weekly, and monthly giveaways. To top it all off, they also have 24/7 live support ready to help you out with anything. Want to try? Check out Skins Monkey by clicking in the link in the description of this video. It really is the best way to support the channel. Thank you. Now, let's get back to the video. So when did NIP stop being NIP? On August the 10th, 2012, their first lineup was formed by signing the former SK gaming duo from CS 1.6, Get Right and Forest, alongside Freiberg and Verflaren, who had made their names known in CS Source, and finally Xis, who had just left Fnatic. At this point, Global Offensive hadn't even been released. While most of professional Counter-Strike was still committed to either 1.6 or Source, Ninjas in Pyjamas had already placed their bet on the game's future, and it paid off immediately. If you've forgotten just how dominant the Swedes were at the beginning of CS, here's the simplest way to put it. They won, and won again, and kept winning for 6 straight months before anyone could finally stop them from lifting another trophy. 2012 and 2013 featured titles at 19 offline events. This side was operating on a completely different level from everybody else, posting a record that will never, ever be beaten in history. It's obvious. I'm talking about their 87-0 map record on LAN. From August 25th, 2012 to April 7th, 2013, NIP won a total of 60 offline matches in a row, 32 best of ones and 28 best of threes. The closest someone has ever come to toppling this achievement was Vitality with 30 LAN series wins in a row, from February 1st, 2025 to June 12th. But even that saw a 66-13 record in maps won. The first few years saw the Swedes making the grand final of the first 5 consecutive majors, even lifting the trophy against their local rivals on German soil in 2014. This was the golden era of Swedish CS. NIP and Fnatic were both world class. Get Right and Forest were more than top draw. They were the world's best duo. Even Freiberg, the aggressive demon, was named King of Banana. Moving forward a few years, it was clear to everyone. The level of competition only got stronger. It wasn't as easy to dominate and keep contesting for the status of the #1 team in the world. For what felt like an age, it was a running joke that this lineup would have a rotating door for anyone who wanted to be their 5th player. 2017 and 18 saw Freiberg and Xis going elsewhere, and by early 2020, the lineup looked completely different. Gone was the veteran duo of Forest and Get Right. The organisation targeted youth and a rebuild for the future. The online era saw their squad managing to stay around the top 15 level in the world, but the Swedes weren't the same contenders like everyone once remembered. With continued experimentations within the lineup to keep their Swedish identity, one aspect aspect was clear. They just couldn't break through. They may have been a tier 1 side, but couldn't win titles. During NIP's peak, academy teams weren't really a thing. It was uncommon and not managed properly, and that played a pivotal role to why they eventually couldn't find replacements to maintain their high status. But that's all hindsight, right? At least Young Ninjas was formed moving into 2021 with a goal of finding the future generation of Swedish players, either to eventually promote to the main roster or look to sell to other tier 1 squads, which would allow a surplus of cash to spend on bigger buyouts for the main team. So when exactly was the slow decline of this unit? Well, if we just focus on the majors from the very first one in CSGO to the last one before the online era, there was a total of 15, with the Swedes attending 12 of them. Outside of a bit of a slump around 2017 and 18, you'd have to say that they were incredibly consistent at competing in the World Championship. As a storyteller, I love to draw correlations, and you cannot convince me otherwise. The downfall of NIP began exactly once they rebranded. In all seriousness, what the f*** was this? In January 2021, the most iconic and recognizable logo in all of Counter-Strike history was butchered into this piss-colored piece of shit. And I kid you not, this is where they lost their entire Swedish identity. Just 4 months later, Device was signed from Astralis to replace Norg. Now, don't get me wrong, this was an incredible signing. Device was one of the best players in the world and arguably the greatest AWPer of the modern era. But it was also significant for another reason. He wasn't Swedish. In fact, the last non-Swedish player to represent this side before Device was Alu back in 2015. For 6 years, NIP had remained committed to a Swedish identity. Now, for the first time in a generation, they were willing to move away from it. And then it happened again. In November, Esatag arrived from Complexity, giving this team a second Danish player, and making it increasingly difficult to maintain a fully Swedish environment. Around the same time, Counter-Strike as a whole was changing. More and more organizations were abandoning national rosters in favor of international lineup, believing that a larger talent pool gave them a better chance of competing at the highest level. NIP were now heading down that same path. Initially, the team still attempted to communicate in Swedish, but the direction of travel felt obvious. Once you start adding multiple foreign players, English eventually becomes unavoidable. The logic behind the move was understandable. Swedish Counter-Strike was no longer producing elite talent at the same rate it had during the glory years, and NIP had secured partnership positions with both ESL and Blast. They were guaranteed access to the biggest events in the world, so management had every incentive to build the strongest lineup possible rather than limit themselves to one nationality. The question was whether the strongest roster actually required abandoning Swedish Counter-Strike altogether. At the time, I thought it was a mistake. Fnatic had already gone international and NIP were following them. It felt like the two organizations that had built Swedish Counter-Strike were simultaneously giving up on it. And what made it even harder to understand was that there were still promising Swedish players coming through the system. In 2022 alone, you had teams like Gamer Legion, Eyeballers, and 0-0 Prospects, packed with young talent. While this organization already had players such as Rez, Brolin, and Fuzi within their orbit. Brolin is probably the best example of the contradiction. After joining NIP from Fnatic in 2022, he spoke about how good it felt to be playing with Swedes again. Around the same time, Fnatic's Khan revealed that Brolin had never been particularly enthusiastic about Fnatic's move to an international roster. Yet, only a few months later, they brought in Alexi B and moved even further towards becoming a European squad. That was the point where the transition stopped feeling temporary. The problem was, once that decision was made, the roster construction rarely inspired confidence. The years that followed were filled with questionable signings, constant changes, and a lack of clear direction. Rather than becoming a world-class international team, they seemed somewhere stuck in between. No longer Swedish, but not truly successful internationally either. And that uncertainty would define the next chapter of the organization. Remember when I stated earlier that NIP attended 12 out of 15 majors between 2013 and 2019? Even during their decline, it was still a side you expected to see at Counter-Strike's biggest events. Then CS2 arrived. They missed the first 3 majors of the new era entirely. When they finally returned in Budapest, the run ended in stage 2. Then came the failure to qualify for Cologne, the tournament that ultimately inspired this entire video. Think about that for a second. One of the most decorated organizations in Counter-Strike history had qualified for just one of the first 5 CS2 majors. The team simply wasn't good enough, and nothing they tried made a difference. And that's what makes the 2025 and 2026 period so fascinating. For the first time in their history, NIP wasn't really a tier 1 squad anymore. Instead, they became trapped in tier 2, too strong to disappear, but too weak to matter. Week after week, they found themselves traveling to smaller international lands and online events, desperately chasing VRS points just to stay alive in the major race. The organisation that once received direct invitations to the biggest tournaments in the world was now grinding through the same circuit as ambitious tier 2 units trying to break through, but so far, it hasn't been enough. One roster decision that did at least signal some willingness to adapt was the move to put Stan on the AWP. Personally, I actually like it. CS2 isn't CSGO. Dedicated AWP specialists don't have the same impact they once did, and modern teams increasingly value players who can contribute heavily with the rifles and the sniper. It's an unconventional transition, but it's one of the few recent decisions that feel forward-thinking rather than reactive. The bigger issue is that the organisation still seems to be searching for an identity. Who exactly is this team supposed to be? Because when you listen to Snappy throughout this year, you hear a captain trying to build structure around a roster that still lacks experience at the highest level. Snappy went on record in January saying the goal was to reach the top 15, ideally the top 10 before the summer. Just listen to what he had to say after finishing last at Blast Open Spring.
Full series here, but still out after 2 series. What's your assessment of NIP's time here at the Blast Open?
I mean, we at times play really good CS, but just have some serious issues with closing out games, and it's starting to become really frustrating, to be honest. And yeah, I think we do crucial mistakes at crucial points in the game, really stupid mistakes, to be quite frank. And I don't know how to solve it, to be honest, because a lot of it is just individual decision making that just lacks tier 1 experience, I would say. We do some really bad stuff at times, and I mean, I don't know how many times we should win Mirage, but we do over peaks when we shouldn't, and we are hiding when we shouldn't. It's kind of like a balance always how to play, and yeah, it's starting to get really on my nerves, also Paravision Ancient, so what can you do?
The frustration is obvious. At 36 years old, Snappy is one of the oldest active players in professional Counter-Strike. The success he enjoyed with ENCE towards the end of CSGO hasn't followed him into CS2, whether at Falcons or now at NIP. And ultimately, that's the burden of being an in-game leader. When a team underperforms, the captain receives the criticism first. Because if we're being honest, this roster should be better than it currently is. The pieces are good enough to compete for consistent tier 1 appearances, yet the results simply haven't matched the expectations, which leaves this squad in a strange position. Their legacy still carries enormous weight. Even today, they remain tied third for the most major appearances in Counter-Strike history. But records like that don't last forever. If the current trajectory continues, organisations like MOUZ, G2 and others will eventually pass them. And perhaps that's the most alarming part of this entire story. For years, NIP's history protected them from irrelevance. In CS2, history is finally starting to run out. At the IM Cologne Major, 3 former Young Ninjas players were competing on the biggest stage in Counter-Strike. Fuzi with Astralis, Nilo with Heroic, and LNZ with MIBR. Yet their current academy roster doesn't feature a single Swedish player. Think about that for a second. The organisation that once represented Swedish Counter-Strike better than anyone else now has an academy system completely detached from Sweden itself. And that's what makes this whole story so frustrating. It's not as if Swedish talent disappeared. Just look at what JW has built with Eyeballers. After being pushed out of Fnatic, he went back to the local scene and invested in developing Swedish players. Today, Eyeballers sit near the top of tier 2 and nearly took down Astralis in a LAN quarterfinal in Romania. Alliance had also come within touching distance of the major. Twist, their in-game leader, previously played for the boys, and Era spent a year on Young Ninjas. Their roster is packed with players who were overlooked while NIP searched elsewhere for answers. And then there's Nilo. I got to cast him on LAN when he was only 18 years old, and even back then he looked special. He was the standout player on Young Ninjas, and in my opinion, already good enough for tier 1 Counter-Strike. So why was he allowed to leave for Metasport in 2023? Why was one of the most promising Swedish prospects of his generation never given a real opportunity? Looking at him on Heroic, it's hard not to wonder what this organisation was thinking. That's ultimately why this story feels so different from the decline of most great teams. NIP didn't run out of talent, didn't run out of resources, didn't even run out of opportunities. Time and time again, the pieces were right there in front of them. They simply chose not to keep them. Today, the future of Swedish Counter-Strike actually looks brighter than it has in years. Players like Malo9 are emerging, Alliance are improving, Eyeballers are thriving, and there is genuine reason for optimism. The irony is that while Swedish CS is finding its footing again, The two organisations that once defined it have spent years drifting away from the scene that made them legendary. Perhaps if they had stayed Swedish, they still would have had a lot of these bad years as Swedish CS was developing. But at the same time, I feel like 2026 would have been the year that it would have paid off. The talent is here, and they would have been the organisation to reap the rewards. Instead, they spent years pursuing an international dream that never became a reality, and it cost them everything. Even if they sign a Swedish team once again, their original fans are long gone. NIP cannot recreate 2012, cannot bring back the 87-0 run, rebuild that legendary 5, or manufacture the connection they once had with Sweden, but they can decide what they want to be moving forward. The ship of Theseus may no longer contain any of its original wood, but its captain can still remember what made it famous. And until ninjas in pyjamas rediscover their identity, they will remain one of the most famous names in Counter-Strike, attached to a side that feels like almost anyone else. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.